Welcome to Blood, Sweat and TalanoaPodcast. BST is a podcast about three guys from Porirua. There's only two of us today, talking about a range of things around health and well-being, community matters and such. So I'm here with Te Are. Kia orana, my friend.
Kia orana, Shane. Kia orana. Kia orana to our viewers.
And apologies for our other uso, Te Hau, who's away on some family commitments at the moment, but he'll be back with us sort of shortly. So Te Are, kick us away. You introduce our guest for today.
Yeah, kia orana tātou. Just like to welcome Caroline Mareko. Kia orana, Caroline.
Kia orana. Lovely
Mahalo.
to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. What we'd like to do is ask if you could just share, or introduce yourself, and then we'll go off from there, please.
Okay, well, it's nice to be on your show or your podcast. My name is Lealamanu'a Caroline Mareko. I've lived in Porirua for most of my life. I won't say how long, but it's well over 50 years anyway. I'm the eldest of seven. My parents migrated here into New Zealand, lived in Wellington. They met here and got married and had the seven of us. So I've got five brothers and a sister. We grew up in the Creek, so we lived at Hampshire Street, attended Porirua PIPC Church. And then my parents bought their first home in the early 70s here in Ascot Park and have been living here since the 1970s. And they're now passed. And we've got a growing family of many, many grandchildren. I think there's about 30 now, and we're into great-grandchildren. I have a son. He's in his 30s and has a growing family. My partner and I live here in the family home, along with niece and nephew. I have seven grandchildren whom I'm very proud of, and we're about to whangai number 8. So be really interesting with my growing family. My son has begrudged that he's getting lower and lower down the priority scale as he provides me with grandchildren. So that's just a little bit about myself in terms of who my family is. But I'm a primary trained teacher. I taught in Porirua for about 18 years and then left the classroom to work for the Ministry of Education, where I was the Pacific Education Coordinator for the Central South region. I did that for about 5 years and then had the opportunity to be a review officer for the Education Review Office here in Wellington. And I got to see some amazing best practice in early childhood, primary and secondary schools. And then I did that for about 2 years until I was approached by a general manager who was an old friend of mine, who wanted me to join the Wellington Kindergarten Association to help them navigate opening the first purpose-built Pacific kindergarten in the country, which is here in Astrolabe Street in Cannons Creek, total for 2 kindergartens. So I started at Wellington Kindergarten Association in 2010. And have been there ever since. And Wellington Kindergarten Association has morphed into 3 mergers and has now become Whanau Manaaki kindergartens. Currently, my role is I'm the Community Services Senior Lead for Pirianga Lufa Pacific and Community Services. That's a business unit under Whanau Manaaki kindergartens. But we've been in operation for about 15 years as Amatanga Ole Launga. So a huge undertaking since we launched Pirianga Lufa last year. And we have quite a few services that service an amazing community.
Cool.
So that's just part of me.
Yeah. Thank you for your Audrey.
Cool. Talofa lava Lealamanu'a. Lau Fionga, really great to have you today. It was a really good sort of start. Now we're going to look to unpack all of those particular things that you've just mentioned because there's a lot more sort of content and substance to that. So, yeah, looking forward to this Talanoa and that as well. Now, you mentioned Hampshire Street. Which part of Hampshire Street were the family before you guys moved up to Ascot Park?
Yeah, I lived at number 66 Hampshire Street. So we're actually just a few houses down from the Richard Tautolo skate park.
Park,
So we're
yes.
just down from there. And we moved into there in the 60s and we attended Winley School. And there are a lot of old families of Porirua that lived on that street. You know, like the Baker family. We had the Lepaio family that was Noa Lepaio. He lived across the road. We had the Rangi family, the King family. Who else? We had the Forbes family. So there were a lot of families where we all started as neighbours there. But those are the old families of Porirua and many more in the other streets, Severs Grove, Gloucester Street. So we had quite a settlement of Pacific families, but also families that we got to know by attending Winley School.
Yeah. So look, what was it like in terms of, it was an early part of Porirua, in terms of the suburb being set up and that? What was it sort of like growing up in the 1960s, early 70s around that sort of period? And particularly, as you've mentioned, a number of sort of families sort of coalescing together.
Well, at that time, those were families, we were all families that had migrated, our parents had migrated to New Zealand. So there were us who had arrived in the, late 50s, early 60s, and those who were still arriving. So, that was a time where our families were just finding their feet, moving away from the whole village concept, from their homelands and coming to settle into a, very strange place. But, it was for work. Our parents came for work to make money to raise a family, but also to send back home to families that they left. It was also a time for us to really develop our community, and that was through the establishment of Porirua PIPC. At that time, we were operating out of the old Bedford Scout Hall, and also at that time we didn't have a church minister, and I suppose our families were still also commuting from Porirua to Newtown PIC, where when our families first arrived into Wellington, they were all attending Newtown PIPC at the time. My parents got married there, and that was a very old green wooden building, and I went to Sunday school there and everything, and then my family decided to move out to Porirua and settle there. So many families were like that.
Yeah.
But I think we had a really great childhood growing up in the creek and growing up in our neighbourhood, but also attending a school where there were many children like us who were Pacific, Māori, and, we all got along really well, but very different.
Yeah. Well, look, one of the things that, you're the oldest of your siblings, but also you've had a number of firsts. So Winley School, you were one of the first students, Waitangiroa Intermediate, and also a foundation student at Aotea College. Sort of what was sort of education, and we'll talk in terms of how that sort of moved into your professional career, but sort of what was it sort of like in terms of the origins of those particular schools at the time, and particularly in terms of your own education?
Well, if we had stayed in Hampshire, we would have gone to Brandon Intermediate. But my parents were really, really lucky, and they worked really hard to buy a house in Ascot Park, and Ascot Park was just developing. So they brought their house through, at that time, the Māori and Pacific Island Affairs, through their housing scheme. And so we built, they got their house built in Ascot Park in the early 70s. They bought that house for $25,000, and it's a 4-bedroom ground level house. So for us, when we moved to Ascot Park, there was no bus service. my brothers, my siblings started at Tairangi School, and it was fortunate that our principal from Winley School, that was his first, when we started there, that was his first year as a principal at Tairangi School. So that was John Sutton at the time. He moved from Winley to Tairangi. I, of course, started at Waitangiroa Intermediate. That was a new intermediate, but I wasn't a foundation pupil there. But it was, I didn't know anyone because the contributing schools at that time were Tairangi School and Karina School at the time. So didn't really know anyone when I got to Waitangiroa Intermediate. Interesting time at the intermediate.
Yeah.
And then if there was no Aotea College, then I would have had to go to a town school and not a local college at the time. My parents felt that if I was to go to college, it would be to Wellington East Girls. But we were called to an assembly in our last year of intermediate, and that's where people came to promote the new college that was being built. And at that time, we had enrolled into Gear Point College. And then when we arrived at the college in 1978, they said, "Welcome to Aotea College."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there was only one block, so it's one administration block and only one block where it housed, I think, about 150 of us at the time as third formers. Yeah.
Third formers.
Wow.
So foundation student.
Old.
Yeah, it's spread out now, isn't it? With the old block in there now, no more trees.
Yeah. Well, that was all farmland behind us. It was all farmland.
Oh.
When we arrived there, it was just all dirt. They hadn't grown. There was no, we had buses. At that time was the Meehan motor buses. So that was our, we bussed down to school. And at Ascot Park, when we moved in, we were only about one of a few houses, just a handful of houses on Conclusion Street at the time.
Yeah.
There was no Whitby. That was all bushland or farmland. It was still looking quite rural up where we were past Waitangiroa Mall at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, it's good to get those recollections because particularly when you look at it now and the new suburbs that have gone in, it's hard to get an idea of what it really looked like unless you can find some old photos of the period as well.
Exactly.
Look, Caroline, one other area I know that was during that time that you were growing up and probably have a little bit more recollection than some of us was the sort of early 1970s and around the Dawn Raids time. And I bring this up only because I know that one, you were one of the many community leaders that attended the official apology several years ago in Auckland and that as well. Is there anything that you sort of draw on as a memory of that time and particularly during that Dawn Raids sort of era for our community?
Well, for us, and learning about knowing about the Dawn Raids, people think it only happened in Auckland, but it happened across the country during that time. And for us, I think I would have been about 10 at the time, or 9 or 10. And we can still remember late at night, we'd get knocks on the door and it'll be police coming in to talk to our parents. And that sort of created some, I don't know, not trauma, but just some strange things that my parents would, every time there was a knock on the door late at night, even when we'd moved to Ascot Park, my parents would tell us to go straight to our rooms. And it's just because of what had happened then, where police would come knocking late at night, only because that was the best time to visit homes because people were, worked shift work. So that was the time to be able to talk to people during those times. So our father would send us up to our room as soon as there was a knock on the door. But we never followed those instructions. We would sit on the stairway because we could see through the lounge from the stairway of our house. They'd come asking, they'll come checking their papers just to see if they were legit, and then ask them questions about did they know anyone who is not legally supposed to be here and that they have an obligation to report. So it created suspicion and conflict within our community. You know, when we've been our parents had worked really hard to grow our community to, because away from the whole village, from homelands. And it was a difficult time for them that they'd have police regularly come round checking. And also no one was allowed, my auntie and uncle who lived with us, they came from Samoa and they lived with us because they were single, and they would leave us once they started their family. And no one was allowed to leave the house without their papers. I can still remember my parents saying, don't forget your papers just in case you get stopped by the police. And they would say that each time to make sure, because they would get stopped. And I remember talking to some people who remember that time who said that they were Māori, but they still got stopped because no one could distinguish whether they were Māori or Pacific. So people got stopped anyway just because they were brown. Yeah, so there was a bit of a mistrust, not suspicion and mistrust, but people never dogged anybody in. But it was scary. It was a scary, scary time, and especially when they were also watching what was happening in other parts of the country too on the news.
Yeah, look, a really disgraceful sort of period in New Zealand's history, and sort of one that, with the government apology a couple of years ago, being at that event, what did it sort of mean in terms of those that of that generation that were there to sort of witness the apology? Well,
it was kind of a eerie feeling. It wasn't with what was going on in front of me, with the government apology. It was what was around me, the people who were seated around me. It was watching them. It was observing, and there was a lot of emotion, and also people remembering. So it brought back memory, probably trauma, feeling and sitting in that audience. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even though what was going on, with the whonga and, the apology, for me, it was about that, what was around me and what was happening around me with people who I knew, but also people who I could see were crying, were upset, people just sitting, just sitting. So I'm not sure if people took in what was going on the stage with the apology and everything, but it's just that feeling of sitting among people who had memories, just like I had memories as well.
Yeah. And I know that you were keen that there also were events wider, like you say, wider than the country in terms of the event in Auckland to really acknowledge that this was something that was widespread.
Yeah, we got to work with Te Papa to do a Dawn Raids workshop here in Porirua. So we ran something at Pātaka, and we invited people who wanted to be a part of knowing more about the Dawn Raids. There were people who were, who were there at the time. And then there were young people who weren't born then but wanted to know. So we all sat together in the same space, sharing our stories. For me, it's having a mum like many others who came on other people's passports or papers. So my mum came to New Zealand on her Auntie Emile's papers, and her Auntie Emile was 7 years older, but I don't know how my mother looked 7 years older and coming on those papers, but she managed to arrive here. And there's many like that who came on other papers. So that was a scary time for all of them if they ever got found out or caught.
Look, and one of the good things is I know Barbara Edmonds actually shared that story in the House in Parliament in terms of talking about sort of that impact of and how that has sort of been a bit of a stain on our community for such a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So changing gears a little bit, we talked about your education and movement across the schools here in Porirua. What sort of led you into teaching as a profession?
Well, I didn't want to be a teacher, to be quite honest. I just wanted a job working for the government at the time. And I'd applied for so many jobs to work as a public servant and, in a government position, but was not successful. So in the end, I gave up and spoke to a very close friend of ours who was my English teacher at Aotea College. And she said, "Oh, why don't you go to Teachers College?" So I applied, and I was supported by Bromwell. She was Bromwell Tobin in those days, but she's now Bromwell, and then Bromwell Anderson, and then with also my Māori teacher, Cassidy Tangaiti. So they helped me get across the line to get an interview at Teachers College in Karori. And I haven't looked back since. But when I did go to Teachers College, and I had to tell my dad he was not happy. That was not the career he wanted me to do. He wanted me to be a secretary in some government department. I mean, can you imagine me being a secretary? Don't think so. Think about it now. Yeah, no, he was not happy. Yeah. He was not happy that I got into Teachers College. He felt that that was not the job for me. And the funny thing is that there was a quota at Teachers College. I was part of the 5% of Pacific that got in. And I remember going to my interview and it was raining and I looked like a drowned rat sitting in my interview to a panel of 4. And was very lucky to have gotten in at the time. And when I had to get my father to help me learn how to catch the bus and then the train and then another bus to Karori because I'd never travelled by myself to town, let alone caught public transport by myself. So my dad had to show me how to do it. I mean, he even held my hand so that because he thought that I was a bit clumsy and blind and would have tripped over somewhere. So he helped me. He helped me learn how to, catch the public transport to get to Teachers College. And I started with, there were a few of us as Pacific who were at the Teachers College. It wasn't as culturally responsive to Pacific at the time. So it was a very mainstream kind of teacher training, and lost myself in there where I didn't feel I was Pacific, more just training to be a teacher. And then by the time I graduated, after 3 years, I graduated in 1986 from Teachers College. I was the only Pacific person that graduated. So there were people who didn't finish that I started with and didn't finish Teachers Training College. They left. So I was the only Pacific person that graduated that year with my cohort, and I made sure that on walking the stage to get my certificate, I had organised for the college choir to sing a Samoan song for me so that I could have something that was Pacific that I could walk across the stage. So I taught the college choir, Whaliula.
Nice.
And because that's where my father is from, and my auntie, who came from Samoa, came to my graduation. So it was really nice to sing, for the choir to sing that song.
You mentioned in there, sort of losing yourself in that as well. A big theme of of our podcast has come up in conversations we've had with people has been about identity. So just keen on your thoughts in terms of when you're sort of either working in a system, working in a number of organizations that don't have that cultural responsiveness, how did you sort of manage it, or how did you sort of deal with it in terms of that when that rubs up against who you actually feel you are?
I suppose I found myself when I started teaching. That's when I woke up to the fact that I wasn't Balangi anymore, because that's how you were sort of supposed to be or act when you were training. But when I came out to teach at Waitangiroa Intermediate, and I was in front of a whole lot of Pacific kids, and then get told that, look, you're it for these kids. And then, it was time to okay, well, I'm Samoan. So that's where, that's when I had to quickly pivot and work to be there for our Pacific students in teaching. So, and also I had people like the OGs like Toini Robati, and I had now Reverend Alofa Lale.
Yeah.
We were all teaching at Waitangiroa Intermediate, and those two had a plan. So they said, you have to be in Poly Club. And Poly Club there was like over 100 kids in Poly Club at that time. Said, you have to learn every dance, know all the drum beats for the Cook Island dancing, and, be able to sing a tune, because I didn't know how to play an instrument, still don't. But we had lots of kids who could play guitar by ear. So I had to do all of that. And then not long after that, those two resigned and went to teach at Porirua College and left me to it. So I was this greenhorn. I was in the middle of my 2-year teacher registration, and there I was running Poly Club. So they had a plan. Yeah.
Sorry, you go, Caroline. Sorry.
No, it was just, that's how it all started for me. And then all my upbringing came to support me, everything that I learned from my parents and from the way I grew up, and also, going to church, which is, a Pacific church, that all helped guide me to be able to support our Pacific students in my teaching. And in my practice, and also in the way that I supported our kids at in my teaching, not just there are kids who still call me Miss, and they're like in their 40s, 50s now. But also I was really strict or really mean. But for me, it was really important that our kids, I was hard on our kids because I wanted the best for them, so that when they left, they were their own person, and not to forget that. So when I growled for a reason, and that was because I cared. And it wasn't to be mean, but it was like, oh, come on, make some good decisions.
I think a lot of those kids, the students back then, they're playing masters with me at the moment.
Oh my gosh!
Well, Caroline, that's really important, because you've seen education sort of inside out for the best part of nearly 40 odd years now.
Yeah.
I'm keen in terms of what shift have you seen in terms of when we talk around responsiveness that we've seen for Pacific students in the education system, and particularly does it actually set them up in terms of success in that as well as a cohort, as a collective cohort?
Well, the Pacific Education Plan and that came out of the Ministry of Education was our best plan. And that kicked off, like the very first Pacific educators, they had a plan for us that they put together, I think would have been about 92 recommendations for Pacific education back in 1974 at Lockdoor House. And these educators were people like Musa Fafui, that's Chris Fafui's dad. Tere Moana Hodges, those were all the OGs of education that put together about 92 recommendations for what was supposed to be Pacific education back in 1974. And then And then Lesieli Tongateo, who was in the Ministry of Education, then wrote the very first Pacific Education Plan to guide the education sector how to work with Pacific students and raise achievement. And that was launched in 1996. And from then on in, we've had a Pacific Education Plan. And each time it just got better and better, even though there were particular areas where the targets weren't met. But there was always a plan to how do we address that? How can we improve? And that's where the Ministry of Education would go across the whole country to consult with our Pacific community about what they saw was important for our kids in terms of achievement, in terms of engaging with families, in terms of attendance or having presence in school. And in the last few years, the ministry and the education sector were becoming more and more culturally responsive to our Pacific learners right across the education sector. But I'll have to say, currently, we're going backwards.
In what way?
Just with the current government being a lot more prescriptive in what our learning should be, and that the focus is on literacy and numeracy. But for us, a lot of work has been done to help lift achievement. So for us, what this does is, I'll just say that things are becoming a lot more prescriptive and restrictive. That this is a have to, this is what teachers have to do. Whereas before it was about making sure that teachers met the learning needs of every learner. Yeah. So I just think there's too much interference in education. And also a lot of program, because of the funding cuts, that has also impacted on really good programs that supported lifting achievement. And also loss of really good staff who are working in those areas. That's what I mean. There's just too much interference in education every time government comes in. It's education that is the political football.
I ask you that question because but while people know you in terms of the education background as a teacher, senior leader, as a assistant principal, and that you also had a stint at the Education Review Office, so you do get to look. You've had a view across the system itself in terms of performance in that. So that was just was keen to get your view around what that sort of looks like now, and is it delivering in terms of providing an opportunity for students in general, but also Pacific students. Part of this sort of pod is around health and well-being, and a whole lot of factors sort of figure into it, and that probably leads me into that next area and talking with you is around Whanau Manaaki and the sort of holistic approach that you sort of take there. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I'm biased. I work for an amazing organisation. So we have 109 early childhood services now, kindergartens, and we have a Pacific home base. We have probably over 5,000 children that are engaged in our services and have about 1,200 staff. And we cover quite a significant region now with mergers of other associations. So we merged with Rimataka Kindergarten Association, Wanganui Kindergarten Association, and South Otago Kindergarten Association. So,
is it the biggest? Is it the biggest in the country now, or is it still second?
We might be the biggest now because we've just taken on Kimbolton in Palmerston North. That's new. And that was about meeting the needs of the rural community there. When their kindergarten was about to be closed down, we picked it up. And I think we're about to reopen it this coming Friday, I think, this week. And then, and also, with South Otago, there's a possible another service opening up down there, working on that. But For us, it's mainly about the kindergarten movement and preserving that, given the current landscape, the political landscape that we're in. There's been talks of removing kindergartens out of the state sector act, but that would be a huge blow to the sector if we're taken out, because we're we're sort of the leverage to for pay parity, for keeping the work conditions and pay scale up there, where we create that sort of level to help support all our other colleagues within the sector, because there are huge inequities within the sector, and it's important that we all work together so that we can get everybody lifted in terms of pay and work conditions, etc. So for Whanau Manaaki itself, we for us it's very much about serving our community. Everything we do is about the children in whānau that are in our services, but also in the communities that we work in as well and serve. So we have the Pirianga Lufa Pacific and Community Services, which I oversee. And in our services, we have the transport service, where we transport over 100 kids a day to their early childhood services, to their kindergarten or home base. And so we have a transport service in Porirua, in Horowhenua, and in Wanganui. And then we also have quite a complex and sophisticated communications hub. When we started with just a phone and a notebook, now it's a system like how you would run a taxi service. It's quite a complex operation, but we make it work. And then we have a navigation team where we've been delivering whanau order, engaging priority, and other social contracts. We've got the Lefale Job and Skills Hub that's in the old TAB in the creek. And that was set up to support our locals to get into employment or skills training with the Porirua development that's happening in the east. And the funding partners there that have supported Lefale were MSD, MB, Kainga Order, Porirua City Council and Ngati Toa. So, and that's that service. And our navigation service has got qualified social workers and community navigators in there. We have the Etowal base. We've just recently got a contract working with Two Water Compass children in our services. We've got a health community navigator up in Horowhenua in supporting patients to get to their hospital appointments, or to ensure that that they're attending their appointments and they're being supported in terms of their health and well-being. So it's quite that's Whanau Manaaki. We've been we're a unique kind of organisation. We're not just kindergarten. We're also about social service, social justice. That's what makes us very unique to the rest of the other kindergarten associations. And we do everything for our communities, for our children, for our families, who are at the centre of everything that we do. And we've got quite a well-oiled machine in Whanau Manaaki, where our finance team, our HR team, our payroll, our administration, our IT, our operations people, they all, we're all wrapped around ensuring that our families and our children and our community are supported in the work that we do.
No, that's great, Caroline. And look, we'll put those links in in the chat and on the phone and on our page in terms of this as well. But one, I think it's fantastic innovation with child being the centre, but also realising that a lot of things impact children's education, and a good start is the best. But then also those services sort of help the family in terms of providing that help and start as well. So fantastic work that you're doing.
You're welcome.
I've got to switch up gears now. Now, you have been involved with the union actually from an early age, haven't you? So I'm going to get you to talk about your involvement with the union movement, but also from the start of your parents, probably obviously giving you that first sort of insight into sort of collective and also people sort of working together to get the best in terms of conditions and that as well.
Yeah, well, my parents have been members of the union since they started working and throughout their whole working life. So Dad was a wharfie, so he was part of the wharfies union, and Mum was a cleaner, and she had about 3 jobs, so she was part of the Service and Food Workers Union at the time. So they were quite active within the union. You would know back in those days there was always strikes on the wharf for something. And yeah, my dad was right in the middle of that with a whole lot of our other dads who worked on the wharf.
My uncles were there too. They seem to have a pretty good gig going there, playing sweepy in the sheds.
Only in between shifts, but it was hard work. It was really hard work on the wharf, but also very dangerous too.
Yeah.
I lost a dear uncle who died, on work site at the time, and my mum was quite active, with the likes of Liz Lilo. She was amazing, because Liz Lilo was involved in, the Privy Council with the overstayers work, but in the union, she was like, the matriarch, along with a few other women, quite strong. And, who would have thought that our mothers were activists out there, and they were pretty stroppy women. I never looked at my mother that way, but once, she was involved in the union, and my gosh. For me, I first joined the union when I was at Teachers College during orientation week. I signed up to be a member of NZI Te Reo at the time as a student member. And I was just a paying member at the time. I just paid my fees. And I only got involved in the early 90s when I was, along with a few others, were approached to set up tell a lie. In my, while I was training, I joined the Pacific Island Teachers Association. It wasn't a union, but it was a network of Pacific teachers. And, in those days, in the early 80s, there weren't that many Pacific teachers in Wellington. So they formed a network, and it was called the Pacific Island Teachers Association. And they were from early childhood, primary and secondary and tertiary. So, and a lot of the OGs of, Pacific teachers were all part of that association. So that was my first introduction to being involved in a network. Looking, that our meetings were about our profession and about how we could support each other when we were one Pacific teacher in a school or in an early childhood service, and what did that look like that we went on our own, and also how we were always the dumping ground for all the naughty Pacific kids. How do we manage that? And it wasn't a shared responsibility in those days. It was every Pacific kid got sent to your classroom. I mean, I got that a lot. And they hated it when they got sent to my classroom. Just the thought of, what could happen to them, but nothing really happened to them. They got a little growling and said, oh, well, just stay there until your teacher's not angry anymore, then you can go back, sort of thing. But yeah, and then from that, I left Teachers College and still stayed in the network. And then NZI leaders approached some of us in the primary sector and asked if there's any way that we could, that they could. What they wanted to do was help us establish a Committee Pacifica branch here in Wellington. There was already a Committee Pacifica branch in Auckland, and they'd been in operation for about 2 or 3 years at the time. So they wanted a branch established here in Wellington. So in order to establish a branch for NZEI, you had to have 100 members. So we were really fortunate to have someone like Tere Moana, who was a lecturer at Teachers College, and she signed up a whole lot of students to make up our 100. And then that's when our Pacific branch kicked off. And so our branch, started back in the 90s. Gosh, I've lost track. We're now over 20 years old now, our branch. And I was the secretary at the time. And Whanau, who was I think she was the assistant principal at Clark, and I was the secretary. And my act, how I became quite active. I became quite active with that Pacific branch. And also I went on all the marches and all the protests on the main streets for NZEI, fighting for, better work conditions and pay for teachers. And for our Pacific branch, it was about applying a more culturally responsive lens to our members, our Pacific members who were members of NZEI Te Aroha. And we were only like about a year and a bit into being a new branch. I don't even think we were a year old. And then the call came from our Auckland sister branch saying that that their Pacific representative on the national executive, which is the governing body of NZEI, was not standing again. And could someone from our branch stand? And of course, between me and Saucy Annandale, she went, "That's not me." And so I was the sucker that had to stand and was still learning about NZEI, but stood for the national executive of the union. And I got in on first past the post.
Nice.
And from there on, it was NZEI that trained me so well, and being quite a really good advocate for our members. And at that time, we had a huge membership of, I think, over 50,000 at the time.
Wow.
It was massive. And I wasn't just there to represent Pacific. Yes, I could give Pacific voice, but I was there to represent 50,000 members of the union.
Yeah.
So 10 years of that, of being on the governing body, and best training ever. But also lots of learnings that I took from that. And while I was on the executive, I then got involved with the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. And that was a massive undertaking, and being in the same space with a whole lot of other unions. Interesting enough, unions, you always see white men running unions, but it was quite daunting to be involved in that space where you were only like about 5 Pacific involved in that whole union movement. Yeah.
What's some of the key issues for workers today in terms of the current environment?
Well, we all know that with our public service, I just think that's crazy. What's happening there, the job losses, I just call it the dismantling of the whole public service, and the impact it's had on our communities, where people have been structured out of positions, and then the job market becoming quite challenging now. Where you're applying for a job and there's 100 and something other people applying for the same job, or you can't get into work that was of that level of pay or conditions. So it's the public service having to pivot and rethink about what job they can take if they are to put food on the table for their families and to survive and have an income. And also those who've worked all their lives and for the first time having to apply at MSD as well. So MSD is doing the best they can, because the pressure's on them to put people into work, but it's jobs that people want to to get the pay and conditions that they have been used to.
Yeah.
So for us, it's the whole public service. It's the Ministry of Regulations that's a concern with, reviewing a whole lot of regulations that's going to impact on workers. For us in the early childhood sector, that's major when they're looking at the regulations of that could compromise the quality of early childhood education. And also the profession of teachers. Also, the getting rid of the fair pay agreement, that's a huge backward step for us when we were trying to create, a fair, a fair base, for pay and for work conditions across industries and sectors. And so what the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions is doing is they launched the Reimagining Aotearoa Together. So there's work being done across the country where we're talking to not just workers, but to our communities, NGOs, to all those who are interested to work together to advocate and support, policies that are going to work for us. And also really develop, I think for us, it's about creating a movement leading up to the next elections. And that's why we've got this campaign happening across the country with our communities to support what we're trying to do leading up to the elections. We're not going to wait till election year. We started as soon as this government came in, then we created a campaign that we've got some work to do to get our communities on board leading up to elections. It's not just, like most times we all turned up to where people turn up on election year asking, vote for me, vote for me. Well, no, what we're doing is developing and socialising what Aotearoa could look like that's going to be best for workers, for families, for communities leading up to elections, so that people, it's not a surprise to our communities, goes, oh, well, this is what we've been talking about for the last 3 years.
Yeah. And when you're talking around the environment, it probably also just good in terms of the ability to come together, and also what particularly a union can provide in terms of support, particularly in this environment. Last time I checked, there's about 6,000 roles that had gone out of the public service. So there is such a saturation across job markets and that, and people are really doing it tough.
Yeah, people are doing it really tough, but also it's really tough on, it's not just those who've lost their jobs, it's also the impact it has on the family and the extended family, where we all rally together to support each other, but it is stretching the purse strings a bit.
Yeah.
It is stretching the resources a bit, but we do what we have to do in order to support our family members. For those of us who are still working and have a job. It's about making sure that we just hold the line for all our families so that people don't suffer.
That's a really good point. That probably just leads into this next segue of stuff around sort of community organising, community advocacy, which again, you've had a significant role in terms of work that you've done in the community and that as well. What's just your importance around the ability of communities to sort of organise as well as provide some advocacy, particularly when it is to power to government, whether local or central?
I think COVID has provided some opportunities where we can mobilise our community in a more collective and collaborative way. That was huge learnings from that, with we're all working together to support our families with food support and with other kinds of support when they were, in the first year when everyone was on lockdown, and then in the second year with the home isolation. So that's where we mobilise some amazing people who wanted to volunteer. And that was the time when, once you tested positive for COVID, you had to isolate. Then it was your families, you know, it was everyone connected. And so that was where no one could leave their house. And so what we did was, instead of providing food that we thought we could deliver to families, we found that food got wasted because some of the food that were in those food parcels, our families didn't even know what the hell they were or how to cook it. So we found a better solution was that what we did was we told families, this is the value of food that we can get for you. Can you please provide us your shopping list? And that's how we stood up the VAR, which was a Pacific Voluntary Army, and we were culturally responsive. And we set up the VAR in Porirua, in Wellington, and in the Hut. And we had over 180 volunteers who helped get shopping lists and go and do the shopping and then go and drop it off to a house, but also do a check if the family was okay, so that that information could come back, and then we were able to direct it to the different social services who were appropriate to go and help families out there. So that's what, you know, and also during COVID, we mobilised our community with the vaccination feast that we ran. And we had huge turnouts, and also there was positivity despite the anti-vax situation. For us, it was about working with those who wanted to get vaxxed, and making sure that they could access, you know, RATS tests and access hygiene resources, but also be able to go through the COVID testing stations, etc., that we set up around Porirua East. So, you know, that's what I mean by COVID provided those opportunities. And also what it did was it built up the trust that we weren't, you know, those 5-minute wonders that come in and help and then take off. We're actually here for the long haul. So what it did was that kind of work during COVID helped develop trust, that there were people who genuinely wanted to help, but also we were sticking around and that we were running. So we used our learnings from COVID to then build on how we can engage more of our community and also get our community involved, but also that our community trusted us. And so we use that phrase, trusted faces, trusted places. And that has been the success of the work that we've been doing, where we're involving our community, they're participating. I mean, one of the biggest success stories is the spatial planning consultation that took place at the Cook Island Hall. I mean, 20,000 people engaged in that. I mean, usually any engagement with Pacific and Porirua, you probably get about 100 or less than, not even 200. But, you know, to get 20,000 responses to spatial planning. And we did it our way, which was culturally responsive and running activities at the Cook Island Hall, and people could come in. And also we had the migrant and refugee communities, all the different communities who ran ethnic specific consultation with the community. And they, you know, and we had that. And so we had teams engage. So that's a winning formula of engagement. And again, the people who were in front of our community were trusted faces, and we held them in trusted places, like, you know, places where our people are familiar with. And everything we run is always with food, and also with, you know, a little bit of a fun element to it. So, you know, learnings, each time we do something with the community, we take those learnings and we build on it. And that's been the success of the work that we've been doing. So from that, we've been really involved in the in supporting the building of the 300 Pacific houses. So the first 18 is going to be, you know, built soon. We've got the turning of the sod for that.
Caroline, just talk a little bit more around that in terms of that housing, in terms of the housing project.
Yep. So Central Pacific Collective is the organisation that is the group that is going to build the 300 Pacific houses, and that's in the around East Place. And you're familiar with East Place, Shane, because you used to live around there. And
Yes, I did.
yeah, and all that land's been cleared now, but also the what has been great was Ngati Toa coming in and offering their land for us to build our houses on. And they've leased it to us, I think, for about 100 years. But what's great is that relationship with Pacific and Ngati Toa that was established 14 years ago when the Pacific community, and that really firmed up our relationship. And today, they've given us, land for us to build our houses on. So the Central Pacific Collective have been talking to our community about the project, about the design of the houses, about the they haven't announced how much these houses would cost, but different ways of whether they're leasehold ownership or so just different discussions around home ownership, and also around financial capability. What else? And also the design of the houses, taking into account intergenerational families, ensuring that the spaces are culturally responsive to Pacific families, etc. So only Pacific families are eligible for these houses, and there's a sort of a criteria that the community advisory group working with Central Pacific Collective have come up with, and so CPC have been socialising all of this that's been put together by the advisory group and CPC, and also socialised out into the community. This is what CPC has been socialising out there and running information meetings and funnel, just so that our families can get all the information they need to decide whether they want one of these houses.
I was keen for you to talk on it only because I know that you sort of assisted them with their engagement process, which at the beginning wasn't really good, but you were able to sort of make them realize that it needed to be a bit more substantive, and actually the design phase was really critical in terms of input.
Yeah, we had a interesting first funnel when CPC came to share the work that they had done so far. And knowing our community, Shane, gosh, they came in like they're ready to wanted to fight somebody or beat somebody up the way they came into that meeting. And at 4:30 that afternoon, I got asked to chair that meeting. And so I had to work really quickly to look at the agenda and work out how we were going to do this, because knowing our community, they were ready to come and have a big argument or a big fight with CPC, where there was no need to. It was just, they hadn't been able to meet with the community until they had all the information in front of them. There's no point in going half pie to talk to the community, and then when they ask you a question and you say, I don't know, well, that's enough to, get a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
And okay, we don't want to engage anymore. So for CPC, for them, it was about pulling together as much information as possible so that they came out to the community, with as much as they can, and not half pie kind of information where that's where that would really brass them off big time. So well, the tone changed as soon as because I wasn't sitting in the front, I was sitting midway, waiting for it to start. And then as soon as I got up to the lectern, the tone changed because it was me cheering.
I reckon.
I mean, who's going to have a go at me? Really? Nah. No, it was there was misunderstandings, misinformation. There were people that was holding on to stuff that turned up into that room, and there were people with agendas as well. So it was great to have that funnel to really respond to everything that people were throwing at CPC at the time, and also people not rattling on about their own blinking situation, because that really gets me, as people with their own personal stuff and throwing it into a community meeting. Yeah, so yeah, I think that was sort of a turning point for CPC, and we've been working alongside them just to keep the community on side. Again,
No,
it's that
definitely.
trusted faces, trusted places. Yeah. So, because we really believe in this project. I mean, people going, oh, but they're only buying the house. But we're saying, but that's a house they didn't have. You know, you've got to consider the environment they were in, where people are living in hotels, they're homeless, and then people who think that they won't ever be able to own their own home. Well,
It's some
this is an
great work that you've
opportunity.
done there, and again, just a really good example in terms of that community advocacy, and also you bringing to bear all of your experience as working with a group of like-minded sort of community activists in terms of the issue. So well done. Now, you got a crew.
Yeah, we have quite a crew. I'm not the only one. There's quite a few of us who all work together. But for us, it's about being protective of our community in Porirua. We've been done to so many times that we're over it. It's like, nah, we're fending off anybody that comes in with some harebrained idea that's all about their own agenda, their own status, their own kudos. We're just like, excuse me, it's like, piss off. We're over you. Don't come into our community. Yeah, we're well-educated people that know what we want, and we'll tell you how it should be, and we'll tell you how you should engage with us. And but don't come in here thinking that you're going to be this missionary, blinking whatever. But yeah, so there's quite a number of us that are fending off, these
And long may it
wannabe.
sort of thing, and
Yeah.
that sort of continued cohort you sort of build there with all these guys. Hey, one thing, so that work over a long time across the number of different fronts that you've been involved with, sort of that was recognised a couple of years ago in terms of a New Zealand honour, merit, a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit. I mean, and what did that mean for the family? I know what you'll probably say in terms of yourself, in terms of the service and Talanoa there, but what did it mean for the family in terms of being that recognition?
Oh, for my family, they were really, really proud. I mean, when I got a letter to say I'd been nominated and I had to keep it, I wasn't allowed to tell anyone because you can get nominated, but you may not get selected or get the award. And that has happened to a few. So I had a little cry when I opened the letter, because all I kept thinking about, here I am, the daughter of two migrants from Samoa who come from, their little villages of Lealamanu'a and Whanau, and yeah. And then thinking about, why do I deserve this when there's been so many people who are a lot more deserving? But I never do things alone. I never have. It's always with people who are either voluntold. You've been in that front of being voluntold, Shane. Yes, my favourite word. And also people who really believed in what I believed in, but most importantly, my family. They've enabled me to do what I've done, including my parents. I wouldn't have been able to do what I did back then when they were alive. I mean, my poor father drove me to everything because I didn't know how to drive, and he drove me to everything. He waited and then would bring me back home, and I think about them. And so I never told my family. And then what happened was, the morning of the announcement, in the Don Post, I get a phone call. I get a text at like 6 a.m. or something. I think, who the hell is texting me at this time? And it was my friend Mangele saying, congratulations. And I'm going, oh my God, I haven't even told my family and it's come out in the papers. And so I had to quickly message my whole family to say, before anybody tells you, I should tell you that I've got a Queen's Honour Award, a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit, and it's published in the morning papers. So I'm just letting you know now. But yeah. And I don't know how my family reacted when they saw that message from me, but they were very, very proud. And I was really proud because you're only allowed so many people to take with you when you get honoured. So I messaged them if all my siblings could come, not just 4 people. And so I took my 5 siblings, because my sister and my younger brother couldn't come over from it because they live overseas. And then I took my CE, Amanda, and one of my besties, Gabby. So they came with me to Government House. And honestly, my brothers, because that was the first time too, they didn't set it up classroom style. They set it up at like a high tea at tables. So my family, we had our own table. And can you imagine my brothers,
one of them, yes.
big
One
unit,
of them, yes.
Lincoln, yeah,
You know
no
which one.
etiquette. Yeah. And and trying to be dainty with the little sandwiches, and my brother's often going to say, just shove it in your mouth, you don't need to take a bite out of a bite-sized blinking sandwich. But the ceremony was amazing there. Just listening to read out your your citation, and I think I was the only Pacific person there for that particular day, because there were other Pacific people being honoured, but it was on different days. And my brothers and the staff of Government House, they loved our table because we actually ate the food. And so they kept popping up the sandwiches and the savouries and the cakes on our table because no one else was eating. And also all the bubbly. And I had to tell the staff, stop serving them the bubbly because we've got a big event after we leave here, and they can't be drunk because they're the host. They've got to host all the guests that are coming, and they've got work to do. And they'll go, no, keep it coming. But there was an amazing time with my siblings. And then we returned back to my work, and everybody was waiting, and we celebrated then, and with lots of, with really good friends, and all my work colleagues, and just very proud people. But like I said, that award was for everyone really, and also just remembering my parents as well, because I wouldn't have done
well
it without
deserved
them.
in terms of that, but also knowing that it takes a village,
Thank
and
you.
you've had some really great sort of support and mentors along the way as well. Caroline, the last thing I'm going to get you to talk about today, this has been really good in terms of we've gone through a whole raft of things, but I know this is something that's very close to you. It's Panikilicious. And I just want you to sort of talk a little bit about that. Started like in 2012, but there was always sort of a motivation in that behind it. So as we sort of close out the last thing, I just want you to talk about that and sort of what that means. Oh, I don't want to make you cry.
I don't know why you asked that question, because you're getting me to cry. Well, my mum died of breast cancer in 2009, but she presented late because she didn't go and get a checkup. She didn't do her mammogram, her screenings. My mother was one of those people that she would go to the doctor and she tells the doctor what her diagnosis is and then what medication she should have. She's one of those. And we would have to escort her into her appointments because she tells a lot of lies about, her illness. So so she was diagnosed in 2007. She got sick when we went to Samoa after my dad's unveiling. And when we brought her back, she went for a test, and that's when they discovered that she had lesions, and she had to do some radiology. And then she must have got really sick, but didn't let on about it. And yeah, and then it was 2009 where she collapsed on Waitangi Day, and we took her into hospital. And then it wasn't long after that we went into palliative care, and we had to admit her into Mary Potter Hospice because we couldn't manage her morphine and her drugs and her pain. So that was hard, but for us it was it was quite devastating for our family with the loss of our mum. We thought we had her for a lot longer after Dad passed. And then and just thinking about that just made me angry that if she was detected earlier, this would never have happened. But she was like many women. And then me and my friends, we were all involved in a church committee. Our committee was the organising committee for our church ministers. So there was a fraternity of church ministers, a network of church ministers, Samoan ministers from different denominations who set up a mafkanga. And they set up organising committee to organise all the different combined services and activities to grow our churches. And it was then that I was talking to my friends. We were all having in my kitchen here having drinks, and who was it? It was me, Sia, Taualafai, Jane Fruin, and Trisha Tull. We were all sitting in the kitchen having a talk, and we said, hey, nobody talks about our women, and they're never on the agenda about their health and well-being. And we're knowing, lots of women who have passed away or undergoing, cancer treatment, or who are sick, and they never put themselves first. And so we talked about, let's do something really nice for our mums. I mean, we're organising sports events for our tupulanga. We're doing combined services to grow our churches, but why don't we do something for our women? And so that from that conversation, that's how we started developing Peniculicious. And Peniculicious came from when I was having coffee with Taulalo Fiso, me and Trisha, and we were talking to him about, because we wanted some money from him at the time, and we were talking about our idea, and he's saying, what are you going to call it? We goes, well, definitely not, Pacific Women and Cancer, because that's a right put off. So he said, well, it needs to be a name that is different, and that's going to capture people's attention. So that's how we came up with the name Peniculicious, from having coffee with Lalo at the muffin break down at North City Plaza at the time. And then from there, we also met with the regional screening team, and that was Robin Fox and Balolo, Scanlon, and Terangi Winitana. I think that's her last name. Yeah, so we all had a conversation about how the regional screening team could help us. And the first thing we did was we did a high tea with all the ministers' wives to get them on board to be champions and explain what we were trying to do. And once we got approval from our ministers' wives and the leaders of the women's fellowships across all the different churches, I was then charged with having to go meet with the ministers. So I asked to be on the agenda, and Reverend Poposua was the chairperson at the time, and he let me come to one of their meetings. So I had to attend a meeting with all the Samoan ministers in that room and talk about Peniculicious and the event. And they asked a lot of really good questions.
Nice.
And then they gave their endorsement. And then we haven't looked back. We launched the very first Peniculicious at the Efakasa Church in Waihimo. And we had a lot of fun. I think over 100 women came at the time. And that was, over 10 years ago. And we've grown ever since. And we had to move it down to Te Raupara Arena. And the winning formula was really the pampering. So it's the pampering that was the vehicle to engage our women, and that with all the different information stores. And we had all health stores and the first launch, the inaugural Piniculicious. And we've just grown from there. It's not just health, it's well-being, it's education, employment, and it just grew and grew and grew. And we had to move it to Raupara Arena. The last couple of years, the Te Mā, the Whanau Fitness for Men, that they were running a program, and then they asked to join us. So now we've got a collaboration with WOF for men and their Tamar program. So now the men are involved. The men have been trying to get involved in our event for years, and we finally let them in because they're getting sicker too, and
No,
we're the
it's some
ones that end
wonderful
up
work
looking
that
after
you've
the
done,
men.
and also in terms of just the genesis of it and how it endures. And then the last event, which was at Toropaha, really big, well attended, a number of things. So it's just gone from strength to strength, but also in terms of the kaupapa around, it's been really strong. No. So, any final words as we close out? I think it's been fantastic in terms of covering a number of things with you, and definitely all of the things that you've been involved with right across. But what's your final words?
I suppose these things just don't happen. They come out of wanting to serve the community better, wanting things to be better for our community, and also having some pretty cool people who come along on that journey as well, and who are leaders in their own right, but also really believe and have the same passions as well about wanting to serve our community and wanting things to be better for our families. So one of the important things for us is that once we gain the trust, it's very precious, very precious, and that we have to look after that trust. Otherwise, people, when you breach it, people will never come back. And that also, I turn 60 in a couple of weeks' time, so I can't be here forever. And it's about people being, people being on that, being on that same waka of serving the community, but also being genuine about it and really looking after our community. It's not just, and also they're not one-off kind of transactional type approaches. You're in it for the long haul. When you choose to serve the community, you're in it for the long haul, and you don't give up.
No,
That's all I have to say, really.
Final sort of closing out, but it's been sort of fantastic, Caroline, in terms of time today. Look, Tiali's going to close us out, but look, my closing thing for you is that you very much embody that that service to the community. O le ala I le pule o le tautua, you very much live out that that saying, and so thank you in terms of the time today, but also people would know Ainga and I are very good friends, but also very much in terms of talking today really just highlights all of that sort of involvement that you've had in the community, and also sort of that influence and impact that you've had across over many years. So Tiali, so whawhatai lava Lealamanu'a, and Tiali will take us out.
Yeah, kia ora, Carol. Yeah, on behalf of Blood, Sweat and Talanoa, thank you very much for sharing your journey with us. I was just listening to everything, and letting Shane take the lead. And it's just there's a lot of times. There's a few things there that you said, which was sort of I was getting back to with my family, but I know there's our viewers out there that will appreciate what you have shared with us all. So again, on behalf of us, Blood, Sweat and Talanoa, thank you very much, and thank your family. Kia ora.
Great. So everyone,
in
terms of the page, join the page as we continue to sort of grow the community, and we'll see everyone in our next episode. Mā te wā.
Ka kite.